Hi, I'm Deborah Holdship, editor of Michigan Today. In this episode of Listen in Michigan, my guest is Frank Uhle. He's an alum, a cultural historian, a shy projectionist, and the author of a gorgeous new history of the film scene in Ann Arbor. Cinema Ann Arbor is a jam-packed collaboration between Fifth Avenue Press, which is the Ann Arbor District Library's publishing imprint, and the University of Michigan Press. And it comes out in June. Okay, based on the town's longstanding commitment to film, dating as far back as 1929, the book literally transcends Ann Arbor and U of M history to encompass the cultural impact of a burgeoning art form and its social, political, and economic impact on the past century. It's almost like one of those expansive epics that starts with guys with handlebar mustaches driving Model Ts and concludes with massive high-rises and astronauts and rockets to Mars, you know? Any film lover or history buff is going to dig this book, but the members of Ann Arbor's longstanding cinema guilds and film societies and all those people who've been attending the Ann Arbor film festivals all these years are going to lose their minds when they see this thing. It's coffee table size and it's 344 pages long, just crammed with the most amazing photos that will transport you through time. Ads, calendars, mugshots, flyers, receipts, notes, schedules. Oh my God, it's so fun. Legendary professors Marvin Felheim, Joe Wehrer, Robert Sklar, they all make appearances, as well as George Manupelli and his once group. And one can't forget the beloved Hugh Cohen, who is still teaching film at 92. So Frank Uhle interviewed some 80 people who created and experienced this vibrant segment of Ann Arbor culture, many of whom are household names today. You've got filmmakers Ken Burns and Michael Moore and Lawrence Kasdan. You've got award-winning editor Jay Cassidy and executive producer John Sloss. I was drawn to the Warhol stuff myself. I recognized the name Buster Simpson, a Seattle-based artist today who photographed an early campus appearance by the Velvet Underground in 1966 when the film festival presented Uptight with Andy Warhol and the Velvet Underground, after which Professor Joe Wehrer and his family put most of them up. The band's return to Ann Arbor a few years later would elicit a scathing review by then student critic Lawrence Kasdan, big chill guy. And when Cinema 2 rented Warhol's Chelsea Girls in 1979, they also had to rent one of the actors, Undine, who brought the film with him. It's crazy. Basically, this book is about when Ann Arbor was really, really cool. Not to mention the good old analog days when films were physical objects stored in canisters that traveled from city to city via planes, trains, and automobiles. The patently offensive Birth of a Nation came to Ann Arbor numerous times, always followed by protest and drama. An experimental picture named Flaming Creatures resulted in the 1967 arrest of film professor Hugh Cohen for showing obscene films. I mean, back in the day, Ingmar Bergman could sell out a theater. Okay, I've been talking long enough. Just know that the Art Cinema League, established in 1932, morphed into the Cinema Guild in 1950, spawning additional groups throughout the years, finally leading to the launch of U of M's film program in the mid-1970s. I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to give you Frank, who's going to explain it all.
People in Chicago claim 1932, but the Art Cinema League was started here in 1932, and they actually took on what had been started in 1929 by this amazing woman named Amy Loomis, who was hired. Yeah, she was hired at the Michigan League. She'd been an undergrad theater major and graduated in 1922, and then the league opened in 1929. So she was hired, and she was putting on student plays, and she'd have an occasional musician, but she had this notion to show movies.
That's so cool.
Yeah, the Film Society, the Art Cinema League, that started in 1932. Their first show was October 10 Days That Shook the World, which is about the glorification of the Russian Revolution in 1932. And they got a letter in the Daily the next day that was just like, you people are a bunch of commies. And they had to go, oh, no, we're not. We're just showing movies. For a few years, in the late 40s, mid-50s, it just was like a popular entertainment. Mm-hmm. And they would show good movies. They would get art films, but they would show recent hits from I guess they weren't multiplexes then. It was the analog era, so you couldn't flip 300 channels of cable or streaming channels or, get Blu-rays from the library. You literally had a schedule, and it would say, 2 months from now, they're showing Casablanca even. I mean, even Casablanca or Gone with the Wind. It would be a rare opportunity to see up on a screen. And one of the things Ann Arbor had this uniquely vibrant film culture. I mean, I actually found a letter written by the head booker for the Midwest of one of the top film distributors, and he said, Ann Arbor we believe that Cinema Guild is the best film society in the nation, exceeded only, and then he put in dashes, possibly, by the Museum of Modern Art. And this was in 1967. The film festival, which some people call the 16-millimeter film festival, was just the Ann Arbor Film Festival, was kind of an art thing, and people, Stan Brakhage and all these, important filmmakers from around the country would send their latest work, and some of the locals were making these films, but it was 16 millimeter. It was a little expensive.
Yeah.
The gear was tough to get, but 8 millimeter was home movies. So the 8 millimeter film festival was like the little sister to the film festival.
Yes.
But for a while, it kind of it took off. It was like really
Captivating,
creative
yeah.
and interesting people. Todd Haynes
wow.
won an award here. Yeah, people that would later become. I mean, John Sloss from Cinema 2, my housemate, is producer on the Velvet Underground movie that Todd Haynes just made, for example.
Oh, wow.
Together over there, Andy Warhol.
We have this chance to combine music and art and films all together.
But yeah, so the 8 millimeter provided a forum for that. And Ann Arbor had the biggest and first 8 millimeter film festival in the country.
I mean, it's perfect for University Town, a film
Right.
society.
Again, students are always coming to campus and they've heard about, John Renoir, or the rules of the game or something, but how do they see it? And Cinema Guild was, especially in the 50s and 60s, performing that function.
Yeah, how do you see it? And then to be in a place where you could see it must have been a real kick, which is why it was so successful for so long, I guess.
Right, and a lot of campuses, and I did a lot of research for the book, had film societies. This is just a bigger town,
Yeah.
and there's so many educated people here just in general that there was a lot more demand. So it just blossomed in the late 60s and into the 70s to where, other film societies were starting. And at the same time, the media was changing. So there were a lot more people making documentaries. Counterculture was emerging. And suddenly you had all this content that wasn't accessible anywhere. And the film societies would be showing these obscure movies that maybe only played a handful of places in the country. And so Ann Arbor, again, we were very fortunate that we had these kind of visionary people that became these presenters. This guy, Ed Weber, who was here, he'd already studied English at Columbia. He came here to go to library school in the mid-50s as a grad student, and he was, a gay man in the 50s, and he was basically an anarchist. I can't speak to that, but he was the curator of the Labadie collection for 40 years.
Yeah.
And he was just famously, didn't give a blank kind of guy. And so he was in front of a Charlton Heston movie, let's show Stan Brakhage movie where a bunch of weird stuff's happening, nobody can understand. And, the college students of the day would come out on a date Saturday night, and then there'd be this freaky movie for 7 minutes. And he would be like, we'll expose them to some freaky stuff.
Yeah.
But, even in 1959, there's a letter, it was written by the Student Government Council. Dear Cinema Guild, we appreciate the fine movies you show, but please don't show any more movies because the regents and all these other people got horrible letters and phone calls. And then he saved his response, which was, I think college students can handle it. I don't know what your problem is. So the people, the Cinema Guild, especially because of some of the people like Ed Weber, took on the function of being like an art house.
Would you mind listening to me for a little while? Only a moment. I just want to tell you that I have made a film for you. Perhaps just for you. I wrote a screenplay about 4 women who met for a few days in dramatic circumstances.
There was a lot of responsibility, and it was a team thing, and you had to sell tickets and put the flyers up and make the flyers. So it really bonded you with those people. And then I was the print runner, so I had to make sure all the films got in and were sent to the proper production booths and shipped them off. And sometimes someone was waiting for it 3 days later in New York at a film festival. And one time I put it on a Greyhound bus instead of putting it on an airplane. And it was like a crisis. And doing these things that are engaging with the public, almost like a business, it taught us a lot.
Yes, so much. Like, I loved that it wasn't just going to see a movie. It was an artistic experience, you know? There was a lot of education going on, and like this Pat Oleschko, is that her name?
She was here in the crux of the thing in the late 60s. But yeah, she started as an undergrad being just kind of a square, as she herself admitted. But she starts showing up, and the Once group is happening, which Joe Wehrer was a part of. And they're doing their extremely freaky theater and, you know, electronic music performances. And she goes to the film festival, which itself kind of was an offshoot of the Once group. And after the first year, she decided the next year to make a freaky costume for every single night. And she showed up just on her own. She's an art student. She just has like a wild costume. And that was, as she said, that was the start of it. And so she became, like, every year, the nightly kickoff at the film festival, her performances.
The staple. Yeah, like, you got to go check it out, see what she's going to do this year.
I spoke with her earlier in the process, and she would say, well, you know, you should talk to my friend Buster Simpson. You should talk to Joe Wehrer. He's a professor, retired. And those people just enlightened me, you know. I interviewed another guy she knew, Eric Staller, who's now kind of a famous outdoor installation artist, and he does other pieces, made these amazing things, one of which Joe Wehrer performed in, where he built a brick wall, brick by brick. And Joe, who's like a architecture professor, but he's also like a performance artist, is just sitting there eating chips and drinking beer and watching a TV set, but the bricks keep going up until the TV set is covered up, and he just is staring at the bricks like he's still watching the TV, and just meaningful kind of things going on. And George Manupelli, this visionary experimental filmmaker himself, said, hey, let's get Warhol out here, you know? The Velvet Underground were completely unknown. I think they'd actually gone into a recording studio like the month before, but they had no records out. They were just Andy Warhol's, freak show. Mm-hmm. So they drive in this RV out here, and they do this thing, and it was just like, it was sold out, it blew everyone away. We had Ondine from the, Andy Warhol Chelsea Girls, and we took them out to the Earl, and we blew all the profits. That we like a dozen of us sitting around this big table and just grilling him about the Velvet Underground because Ondine was there.
When else are you going to get to do that?
Yeah.
So fun. Yeah, and then Andy Warhol up in the projectionist booth.
Yeah. No, that was, again, one of the holy grails for me was somehow documenting that performance. And luckily, here's Buster's like, I got these pictures. I was sitting in the front row. You can see like the movie on the screen and Nico standing there. So I was just like, man, I never thought those existed.
Was that the same show that Iggy showed up to? And then didn't Iggy hook up with Nico because of that or something?
Yeah, no, that was
a small world.
There were so many connections. Like Iggy was in this band called the Iguanas, and then he was in this band called the Prime Movers. People started making films and just weird experimental films. And they showed at the film festival a movie that the Prime Movers band had made, and they played live.
Okay.
And so they were invited to the after party, which was like 3 nights later. And as it happens, James Osterberg, Iggy, was a friend of the Wehrer family, and the party was at their house. Oh. Their kids went to high school together.
Okay.
So Iggy was there, and apparently Andy Warhol in his diary even recorded, I met a nice young man, And but so Nico, a couple years later, Iggy and Nico had some passionate encounter, and apparently were living here in Ann Arbor for a while. And John Cale of the Velvet Underground was the producer of the first Stooges album, and that's where they first encountered each other. So, all these connections.
I mean, do you ever just wish we could just go back? And Ann Arbor was so much cooler back then.
No comment. Yeah, no, it was pretty cool. I mean, the stuff that was going on was, it's just a difference in the culture. It's like, not to fault people because the world has changed with digital devices, but if you wanted to see a movie, I mean, these movies would sell out. There would be hundreds of people to see like an Ingmar Bergman movie.
It is called Whispers and Cries. If you ask me whether it is a good or a bad film, I don't know. All I know is that it is a film dear to my heart.
Now, the students did have a little fun with some controversial films. So, Flaming Creatures, deemed obscene, pornographic, rated X. What was the scoop?
It was an experimental film, and it had a lot of the film is kind of drag performers putting on makeup and dancing. There's a sexual assault, which is in a very stylized way, but obviously wouldn't pass muster today. Mm-hmm. It's not that graphic. But the graphic aspects of it are, at the time, there's close-ups of genitalia and things, but nothing that would have caused more than an R rating, just like 3 or 4 years later.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so Hugh Cohen came here. By the way, he's still teaching at 92.
That's amazing.
Teaching film. And and very vibrantly, very, very energetically, started a PhD in the late 50s and joined Cinema Guild in 1960. So he was a member of Cinema Guild for pretty much 40 years.
Wow.
But he was a juror at the film festival. The first year they had judges in 1964. And then in 1967, he was arrested by the Ann Arbor police for the movie Flaming Creatures, which Ed Wehrer suggested because he was the one who was like, yeah, let's show that movie. But the 3 students and Hugh, who was the faculty advisor at the time, were all arrested and fingerprinted, mugshots. Apparently most of the parents of the students were attorneys. So one of the students just copped a plea, and they just dropped the charges.
Okay. It is interesting, like these characters, too. Like you've mentioned Manupelli, and then like Cohen and these different people who were... And Manupelli was a faculty member as well?
Right, yeah. So he was hired at the art school. I think he was an associate professor in 1962.
Okay.
And he taught there for 10 years, and then he left in 1972.
And then, something as subversive or as eclectic and groovy as a film society is going to attract people that are not of the mainstream all the time. So that's a good place to keep your eyes peeled for radicals. And
big players in my book were gay men who had to live closeted lives during the time they were involved in what was happening in the book.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
Interesting characters that were all part of this,
Yeah. The University of Michigan is a big tent, and there's the people that are really into the athletics and the people that are very career focused. And there's lots of people, kind of artsy people that are doing kind of not sure what they're going to do when they get out, like I was. And the film societies in those days were kind of a magnet for people like that. And to the university's credit, I will say, even though they were kind of oftentimes kind of combative, they gave the University of Michigan Film Societies a little bit more rope than some schools. Some schools, it was just directly controlled. These were, there's some pretty wild-eyed people in these film societies. And to this day, I see them, I'm like, wow, those people are crazy, But the university kind of let them have this little niche. It was cool, And here's the thing. Those people have gone on to be some of the most prominent alumni.
Exactly.
Right? And the Oscar goes to Green Book.
Like my housemate's a guy named John Sloss. He's now probably produced 60 or executive produced 60 movies, including like John Sayles movies, Richard Linklater's movies, Boyhood. He was executive producer of Green Book. He was standing on the stage of the Oscars.
Wow, I didn't realize.
Yeah, Errol Morris movies, The Fog of War. Hardcore, serious, art movies, and bridging over to popular. But he wasn't even that interested in film until he just happened to join Cinema 2 because his dorm neighbor said, "Oh, let's check it out, the movies."
Right, in that one instance, and then look at all the art we have as a result of that experience. Yeah.
Like Larry Kasdan wrote a single article for The Daily, which is the review of the Velvet Underground playing at Hill Auditorium, which was in the book, was notoriously booed off the stage practically because they over-promoted it to the mainstream kind of frat audience.
Oh.
And they thought they'd seen experimental movies, and they saw, as Larry Kasdan I think put it, loud droning songs. I think he said the songs seemed to last forever. And again, if you weren't expecting that, you thought you were going to see something really wild, and you were like a 10-minute song about heroin or something. And people were whistling. Someone picked up a harmonica, was playing it in the seats and stuff. It's crazy.
I love too, all the different people that have come over the years too. It's neat to see Frank Capra sitting there talking to students, and
No, that was one of the coolest things. We really tried to get people. They had this big Robert Altman festival, and Robert Altman, I don't think, had done many of these things. And they had a class. Diane Kirkpatrick was teaching, and this guy Mike Gildo was in the group with her in her class, and they were like, let's get Robert Altman to come. So they got this huge festival with Altman and Alan Rudolph and Joan Tewksbury and a couple film critics, Andrew Saris, Molly Haskell, and Elliot Gould, a semester-long thing, and they had like 10 movies, and then Altman was speaking at Hill, and it was this, incredibly ambitious thing, and it was in conjunction with a class, and the Film Societies all pitched in and showed all the movies. But the thing is, Robert Altman, who I will also say he was a aficionado of marijuana, and Ann Arbor had then this $5 fine that had been instituted, and some of the Film Society people heard about it. And so this guy, Jerry Fialka, who's a real character in the Film Societies, he got a bunch of pot for Robert Altman. He said, we're going to get him the best pot in town.
Oh, my God.
So Robert Altman's like backstage smoking pot with the Film Society people. And then he comes out, and they were supposed to show a feature, but the film studio shut it down. We will not show the feature.
Oh.
Because it was playing at the Michigan Theater.
Oh, okay.
2 weeks later. So Altman's like, I got like 2 hours to fill, and I just had a bunch of pot. And I'm like, I don't know, go ahead with your questions. And this young guy's asking this wacky question that he can't get out of his mouth. And finally, Altman's like, are you asking a question or are you auditioning? And then, like, the next day, the Free Press in Detroit runs an article, Robert Altman would like to find the young man who asked the baffling 5-minute question. If he does, he'll have a role in his next movie. And by God, he was cast in the movie with, like, Carol Burnett, Lillian Gish, Geraldine Chaplin, all these big stars with speaking, like, lines. He wasn't just an extra. He like, walks in the scene and says some stuff. Amazing.
Guess who Robert Altman and 20th Century Fox had invited to a wedding? Carol Burnett, Mia Farrow, Geraldine Chaplin, Desi Arnaz Jr., Vittorio Gassman, Dina Merrill, Lauren Hutton, Lillian Gish, Howard Duff. A nervous nurse, a senile bishop, a happy mother, a lost family, a fight, a fall, a reunion, an accident, a stampede, infidelity, passion, romance, all come together in a wedding to end all weddings. Rated PG. Now,
as with so many of these people, when I would interview them, I'd say, do you have any pictures? And he had these little Polaroid kind of shots that he's like, here's me eating a lollipop on the set. Here's me making a funny face with Geraldine Chaplin sitting next to me. Or like Hugh Cohen.
What a trip.
Yeah, Hugh Cohen's like, I've got a scrapbook. It's like literally like 6 inches high. It has his mugshot, which is in the book. It has the note that the police officer wrote, confiscated one film, Flaming Creatures, Lieutenant Stoudemire, and so these became a huge added dimension of the book was the illustrations. And you mentioned Frank Capra. The Daily ran this kind of blurry photo, and I had a credit, David Margolick, and I thought I'd look this guy up. Turns out he's actually a journalist who writes for the New York Times and other things. And he was like, I think I might have my negatives still. Oh. And he had all of the photos he'd taken of Frank Capra in the class. So I was able to use a much better photo. And also, he took a shot of the audience. So I have these... In the book, there's these 2-page spreads of audience members. And that was just like most people, like the Daily, would never publish that. Yeah. But these people happen to take a photo at the same time since we got the negatives, right? So, like, in Jay Cassidy at the Bentley, 4,900 pictures that he had digitally scanned. And there's all these pictures of Sam Fuller speaking on campus in 1970, including a great shot from behind. The audience is just enraptured over at the what's called Lorch Hall now. So I was able, through the Bentley, to find all these interesting connections that weren't just about film, per se. Mm-hmm. The administrative files were so useful, and the Labadie collection, and the special collections, Mavericks and Makers, papers of Robert Altman. I mean, I drew on all of those. We had so much going on. If you look at the schedules, which I reprinted a lot of them in the book.
They're jammed.
They're just jammed with classic films. I mean, I was showing Hugh Cohen one the other day, and he was like, that is a hell of a good schedule. 55 years later, he's like, wow, we really did do some amazing stuff.
He is not kidding. U of M continues to cement its reputation as a leader in American film with its Mavericks and Makers archive, which holds the work of directors Orson Welles, Robert Altman, John Sayles, and others. And the reason I was laughing so hard at Frank's story about the kid who was cast in Altman's film The Wedding is because I've known that guy, music critic Mark Deming, and that story since I was in college and working at the State News with him at MSU. So many threads come together here. Check the links in the text to get the book. It is so fun. Okay, thanks for listening. I'll see you at the movies. Until then, as always, go blue.